Welcome in, everyone. My name is Jared Morrison, and I'm an organization development consultant with the Learning and Organizational Development Unit. And I'm excited to welcome you into this ACEL 2 Extension series. It is a collaboration between Extension and our Department of Agriculture, Communication, Education, and Leadership. And we have my colleague Beth Flynn, who helps on ACEL side, and I help organize on the extension side. And all of our ACEL faculty who volunteered to lead our sessions. It's been a wonderful collaboration, and we're excited to be into our third year and soon planning for our fourth year pretty soon. But thank you all for being here. We do have our landing page. It's go.osu.edu/ACEL2extension. That has information about the rest of this series, recordings of this series, and also links to our previous series as well, if you'd like to check back in on those. So without further ado, we'll jump into today's session, which is, as you see on the screen, How the Brain Learns. And our presenter is Dr. Shannon Washburn, who is a professor of agricultural education, also the chair of the Department of ACEL, and relatively newly named the Sanford G. Price and Isabel P. Barbie Chair in Teaching, Advising, and Learning. So Dr. Washburn, take it away. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Jared, and thanks everybody for being here. I see some familiar names, but I'm also going to request that if I could see some familiar faces, that would be really helpful for me. If you are in a place where your bandwidth will allow you to turn on a camera, that would make me feel a bit less like I'm talking to an empty room. And what I want to do is make this session as interactive as we possibly can. And here's why. You, for some reason, signed up for a session titled How the Brain Learns, taught by a guy who is an ag educator, not a neurologist. And you signed up for that session with a duration of 60 minutes. So it's no small task to help you understand how the brain learns in 60 minutes with no neurology background. But while I'm not a neurologist, I have read some books, right? So, and I stayed in a Holiday Inn once. So one of the books that I think is one of the most helpful, and probably the one that changed my thinking about effective instruction the most, is the book How the Brain Learns, and the author is David Sousa, S-O-U-S-A. If you haven't picked this one up, or if you haven't been to one of my sessions before, you may have heard me talk about this text. I really think it is a tremendously helpful resource. And so we're going to focus on some concepts from that book today. I've actually lifted some images directly from the text that I'm going to share with you to help set the context for what we're going to be working on today. And I want this to be an interactive session. So please just jump in, unmute, and ask the question. I would prefer that you not use the text or the chat function, because I've got so many things going on my screen that I may miss your chat. So just jump in with a comment anytime. This is not such a huge group that that's going to be ever disruptive for me. Okay, so with all of that set up, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I know about how the brain learns. And I emphasize that for a very specific reason. I emphasize sharing with you a little bit because I think one of the most valuable lessons that I've learned from the text, How the Brain Learns, is the concept that in any learning environment, less is more. Less is more. And I have absolutely in my career been guilty of trying to pack so much content into every session that I have an opportunity to present that I can't possibly do any of it justice. And I think that is an important reminder for all of us that when you have a 60-minute opportunity to share some ideas, a few ideas shared effectively and in depth will probably last longer and make a bigger impact for your learners than trying to pack that entire 60 minutes with a whole bunch of information. And so for that reason, I'm going to encourage discussion. I want to let you know that your thoughts and reactions to these ideas are more important than the ideas that I have, because we learn by sharing thoughts and ideas, okay? And taking an active role in the learning process. But I want to begin this conversation with an image from the text that I think is a really helpful way to think about how we process information. And I know in other sessions that I've shared with you, I've asked the question, what is learning? And very often the response to what is learning comes back to some sort of exchange of information, right? Learning doesn't happen in the absence of information. But I think it is important for us, as this model illustrates, to think about the brain as a really fascinating device, organ, muscle, whatever you want to call it, that really serves the purpose of filtering information, making sense of information, storing information, and then hopefully creating a system of information retrieval, okay? And as we think about that process, some of you may remember a time in your careers where you actually kept information in a physical filing cabinet. Others of you are young enough that you've never owned a filing cabinet, and you wonder what in the world they're for. I have an antique oak filing cabinet in my home office that I think is a beautiful piece of furniture. And if you've ever Zoomed with me at home, you've seen it in my background. But I have to admit there's nothing inside it because all of my stuff is electronic. But I want you to picture that filing cabinet. In the old days of filing cabinets, we had a little rectangular slot on the front of the door that would hold a little slip of paper, right? And you could slide a slip of paper in that slot, and it would tell you, these are the types of things that are in this drawer, right? When you open that file drawer or that filing cabinet drawer, you have hopefully not just piles of stuff in there, but you have discrete pieces of information in distinguishable folders, correct? Those folders each have a label. And hopefully it's not labeled with information like 2021, because that would be way too random and abstract for you to make sense of what's in that folder. You would label it with something that has a significant meaning to you, so you would know what's inside that folder, okay? So working with that visual image of the file drawer, the process of learning really is intended to help our brain take information from whatever sensory input from which we received it, as is illustrated on the left side of this image. Whatever sense is the source of information, that information goes into the immediate memory, which is information resides there for an incredibly short amount of time. And your brain actively processes what to do with that information. Is it, for example, a smell that may indicate danger? If a smell is the sense that your immediate memory detects that indicates danger, your brain is going to tell your body to do something, right? If it is a piece of information that you find intriguing, when that information enters your immediate memory, your brain is going to make a decision. Is this critical and worth keeping? or is this non-essential and occupying space that doesn't need to be wasted on this information and therefore should be forgotten? Okay, this is a split-second process where information is in our immediate memory. If your brain determines that that content or that information is worthwhile, it will move to what is called your working memory. And working memory is a place where, again, your brain can make the determination does not compute, right? And therefore will dump the information. To me, the best illustration of this is the 14-year-old in an algebra class. That does not compute image comes up on the screen very often for the 14-year-old in an algebra class, and a lot of things just get dumped, right? Which is a problem, isn't it? So in the working memory, though, your brain this is where your brain really makes meaning of that information and determines which drawer the information needs to go into and how to label the folder into which that information is stored, okay? A really critical portion of working memory or function of working memory is the act of retrieving information. Have you ever been in a situation where you know that you know a piece of information, but you just can't recall it, right? All of us have been there many times. And that is a function of your working memory not recognizing, dang it, which drawer did I put that in? Which folder within the drawer is that information stored? And very often, when you have those encounters, you notice that maybe another statement comes along in the conversation that jogs your memory and says, oh, that information is in this folder, pulls it back out, moves it to your working memory, and that name you forgot or that theory that you couldn't remember just comes blurting out of your mouth because, wow, it just got dumped into working memory, right? So the whole idea here with effective instruction and its relationship to the information processing model is that we want to design instruction in such a way that allows our learners to use that sensory input, determine in immediate memory that the information is worth keeping, moving it to working memory, connecting it with other ideas that are already in memory storage, and putting that information in the right file drawer and file folder, right? So that when they need that information in the future, and I'm going to challenge you to think about this context or this example in the context of something you need to teach in your extension program. We want to help our learners file that information in such a way that when they need it, they know how to retrieve it again. And so I think that is an important thing to remember. Are we ever going to structure a learning experience in such a way that no forgetting happens? Absolutely zero forgetting occurs during that learning encounter. Absolutely not. And the primary reason for that is twofold, well, really threefold. The first reason is that our immediate memory has a limited capacity. The second reason is that our working memory has a limited capacity. And the third reason is that there are aspects of the learner that you as the educator cannot possibly control, so in such a way that no forgetting happens for the learner. Distractions in their life, lack of prior experiences with the content you're presenting and the inability to make connections to it. And this notion up here in the top right corner of the image, your learner's self-concept, okay? Some of us believe that we can't possibly whatever. I can't possibly become a better teacher. I can't possibly learn math. I can't possibly, learn to cook in a certain way. Whatever it is, we have self-concepts that limit our ability to learn, and that's an important thing to recognize about all of our learners. But the big idea with this, well, let me stop there because I've been yammering about this picture for a while. Who has a reaction or an observation that has popped into your working memory as we've shared these ideas? Maybe an experience with teaching. Observations, reactions. Okay, we're charging on then. The main concept that I want to emphasize today is the role of retention in that entire process of information storing. And retention is key to this. And as I mentioned with the previous slide, there are a lot of factors that impact retention. One of those is helping the learner make connections to the information in a way that is meaningful for them. But another really critical aspect goes back to the information processing model, and that deals with how much capacity does the learner have in their immediate and working memory. And so to illustrate this point, I have a hands-on activity that I'm going to ask you to participate in. If you've been to my other sessions, you know I like to use some little engaging activities. And you may think that this one is a little similar to one you may have seen me use before, but it's different and serves a different purpose. So here's the task. If you don't have one handy, please grab something to write with and something to write on. If you're taking notes on a computer, I'm going to ask you to shift to analog mode and use paper and pen or pencil, please. So I'll give you a second to find one. And Misty, I'm sorry this is making you stop walking. I'm so impressed with your ability to exercise while you learn. And that, by the way, Misty, is a wonderful way to increase the capacity of your immediate and working memory. Exercising while learning is a great way to learn. Does everybody have something to write with? In just a few moments, I'm going to show you a collection of 10 words all at one time, and I have my timer set to 12 seconds. Oh my goodness, I had my timer set to 12 minutes. That's going to be problematic. I need to set my timer to 12 seconds. When I show you this list of 10 words, I'm going to give you 12 seconds to write down or to stare at and not write, okay? You're only looking, you're not writing. You have 12 seconds to look at and retain as many of these words as possible, okay? So, bad example of directions there. You have pen and paper. You are not using it for the next 12 seconds. After the 12 seconds is up, you may pick up your pen or pencil, jot down as many of the words as you recall. Is everybody clear on that now? Okay, here we go. Here are our words. You're 12, oh, you hear my timer? 12 seconds is up. Jot down words. Rhonda, I did not mean to make you cry. Okay, I'm glad all is well. Does everybody have all the words that you can recall? Raise your hand or drop a chat if you were able to recall all 10 of the words. Okay. Somebody give me a shout out here. What was the problem with retaining these 10 words in 12 seconds?
They had no meaning.
You couldn't make connections to the words because they weren't words that you recognized. Okay, that's good, Summer. What else?
It didn't make sense.
Yeah, so they didn't make sense in context with one another either. So individually they had no meaning and contextually they had no meaning. So that's an important point as well. Another, I think, important observation is that 10 pieces of information can't fit in your immediate memory. And especially when you have no context with those pieces of information, your brain isn't able to process that much information in such a short period of time. Okay, all of that is really fascinating stuff. But I want to ask you to take another look at this list of words and circle the ones on your list that you did get correct. Did anyone get at least 5 of the words correct? Beth, you did? Great. So Beth, since you raised your hand, which 5 were correct? Could you read them out?
Yes. BEB, because I thought of Trina Beebe. LAK, because it made lake. MIL for military. LUN for, I was thinking luge, but slunge. And VEK, and I don't know why I know VEK.
Okay, interesting. Would someone else be willing to volunteer with the words that they got correct? Ray?
I got exactly 5 as well.
Okay, what were they?
Lack, SAR, MIL, FIF, and BEB.
Lack, SAR, MIL, FIF,
FIF, and BEB.
and BEB. Okay.
And I
Lack.
didn't relate them to anything. It was just, they just stayed in my brain.
And that was the order in which you wrote them down, Ray?
No, there were other things in between that I remembered incorrectly. Like I
Okay.
put fur and I put LEK, LEK for one of them. So yeah, I had some different ones that I remembered incorrectly, but those
Yeah.
were the 5 I
Yeah.
got correct.
Well, I want you to take a look at the words that Ray got correct, and I want to write them down one more time. So they were lack,
Lack, SAR,
SAR,
MIL,
MIL,
FIF,
FIF, FIF,
and BEB.
and BEB.
And I didn't remember them in order, but that's in the line of all the,
Yeah.
that's the order in the line of, there were things in between them.
So Ray's brain is a great example of the point that I want to illustrate here. Thank you, Ray, for donating your brain to
My
science.
brain, oh no. Okay.
The point that I want to make here, if you look at the position of the words that Ray got correct, and this is not going to be true for everyone because a 12-second activity does not do this very effectively. And Beth's example was fascinating too, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But look at the position on the list. LAK, MIL, and then BEB, SAR, and FIF. The items that Ray remembered correctly were at the beginning of the list and the end of the list, which is true more often than not for a lot of us in a learning experience. Now, do you recall how Beth described the way she remembered the words? Beth intentionally tried to draw connections to the words on the list that meant something to her. That's a common thing that brains do as well.
I
We
did that
try-
as well.
Yeah.
I
We-
remember
Go ahead, Miss.
mine were the opposite. Fifth, SAR, BEB, and MIL were the ones I remembered in that order. And MIL just stuck because that's mother-in-law to me. So that's why I remember that one. But the other ones, I just went backwards, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. So the point that I want to emphasize here is a concept known as the primacy recency effect. Have you ever heard of the primacy recency effect? Nod if you have. Okay. Summer, you're nodding. Would you mind sharing your recollection of what the primacy recency effect is?
I said I heard of it.
It's on the spot.
I think, yes, I think this talks about like the most recent thing that you've seen is what you're gonna remember. And the first stuff in the list is also, or first stuff, I don't know, go on.
Summer, I'm turning the presentation over to you. You got it. Absolutely. So the primacy part of the primacy recency effect is the first things that we observe in a learning environment. Okay. So an example may be when you walk into a new place, the items that stand out to you and grab your attention first are the images you're going to have years later of that place, right? So that's the primacy piece. Or in the context of an extension education setting, the first components or the first ideas shared in a presentation are going to be the ones that our learners retain the best, okay? So in the case of what I've done with you today, the first 15 minutes we spent, or really 20 minutes we spent talking about the information processing model. And I showed you an image of it as well. So you are probably, in most cases, likely to remember those ideas better than the concepts that we're talking about right now, which is why I wanted to give you an opportunity to do this word retention memory, because that's a practice thing. It's more of a doing thing than being passive and listening. But the primacy piece is roughly the first 15 to 20 minutes of any learning opportunity are going to be what we retain the best. And the last 10 minutes or so, the most recent ideas shared will be the second most likely to be retained. And in the middle is what is often known as downtime. The segment in the middle is what you are most likely to be most fuzzy about, okay? Here's the one of the biggest points that I want to draw from emphasizing the primacy recency effect in the learning process with you. It is this question: how can we structure our learning opportunities for the stakeholders we serve to best maximize the primacy recency effect? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question: how often do we completely violate the primacy recency effect when we structure learning opportunities? In other words, where we give a lot of gravy up front and maybe a few potatoes, but the meat of the content is smack in the middle of the presentation, topped off with a little bit of a review gravy, or maybe some sweet things to finish out the learning course at the end. It goes against human nature to not put the most important stuff smack in the middle. And I think that is a really valuable lesson, because this concept is absolutely true in any learning environment. The primacy recency effect is a powerful part of how the brain functions. And it is also completely contrary to logic in as we think about ordering the dissemination of information. Unless you're a journalist, right? You know how journalists write news stories. The most important details are in the first paragraph. I'm going to challenge you as educators to think like a journalist. How do we get the big idea up front? How do we emphasize additional important information at the end of the presentation? And then the big question that I want to challenge you all with and ask for some responses is, what do we do with the middle? So this is the audience participation part of the show. If we're going to structure and a learning engagement opportunity using the primacy recency effect, we know we have to package the most important information up front and a few additional key details at the end. But what do we do with the middle? Share your ideas.
Engaging activities such as timed activities where you'll have somebody write down letters that they remember.
Okay. Thanks, Summer. Other ideas?
Shannon, you have a couple in the chat.
Oh.
You said create opportunities for connection in the middle and hands-on activities for the middle content.
Yes, absolutely. So those approaches are what David Sousa would refer to as practice or rehearsal. Okay, opportunities to apply those main ideas. Notice what I'm trying to model here. Opportunities in the middle for your learners to apply and make meaning of those most important ideas are the best thing to do in the middle of the learning segment. Okay. Now here's another fascinating thing about this. There is, when you shift the focus, and I think it was Summer who said engaging your audience with something that has them active, right? When you create a shift in the focus for your learners, you actually introduce kind of a second prime time, right? Because that practice time that happens in the middle, where their attention is focused on something else, allows their brain to focus on a new area of concentration. Okay, so Misty, engaging activities for virtual. Yeah, virtual is tough for me. And I think it's tough for all of us, right? Because I am absolutely positive that if, I don't know, Jared, how many people do we have on today?
We got 37 right now.
Okay, so if we were in a room together with 37 people, I have no doubt that your level of comfort with each other and hopefully the environment that I would establish, you would feel completely confident just blurting out responses like I've asked you to do, right? But on Zoom, there is this hesitancy to do that. So I'm struggling with that as well, Misty. I appreciate you pointing that out. Other observations about
I didn't say you were struggling, by the way. I was just giving you examples.
was not implying that whatsoever. What other ideas do you have about how to structure either online or in-person learning opportunities to maximize primacy recency?
I think that a lot of times breakout sessions in person and online, even though a lot of people dread them, myself included, I tend to get talking when there's fewer people in a group. And so I like when educators do breakout sessions from a teacher perspective, because then that I actually start talking about the content, and then we can go back and share, because if you get really into it myself, then I want to share in the larger group.
Awesome. Thank you, Summer. By the way, I don't have breakouts scheduled for today, so I apologize, but you raise a really valuable point. And I want us to process too what happens in the brain, especially for adult learners when they have an opportunity to speak in the learning environment. What happens for them?
They remember things better.
They remember, definitely.
Process the information.
They process the information, absolutely. And most of us as adult learners will process and remember better, because when we are talking, we are thinking about our own prior experiences. And we are connecting the new ideas to our prior experiences. Think back to our image of the information processing model. When we have new information and we have opportunities to connect new information to prior experiences, what is happening with where that information is going in terms of the file cabinet? It's more likely to end up in the right cabinet, the right drawer, and the right folder, because those prior experiences added to this new information. The next time I need that new information, I'm going to go back to the path that my brain is used to going to for that information, right? The things that I've used before, I'm going to remember which folder and which drawer that information is in, and my brain path is going to take me there. But guess what? Next time it's going to find new information that has been stored properly, because the adult mind has had an opportunity to process it verbally. That verbal processing is a critical piece of making those connections, and especially using opportunities to connect to prior experiences. So Whitney asks or mentions pausing the recording periodically to allow people to express more openly. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, so Whitney is suggesting that if you're recording, that's a great point. If you're recording a Zoom session, people don't want to share their ideas because, oh my gosh, that idea that I shared, and it's risky enough to put yourself out there and share your thought, but knowing that it's going to be preserved in a recording. Yeah. Excellent point, Whitney. So pausing that, and I don't even know, are we recording, Jared? Okay, yeah. Very good. So yes, that's a great point. And especially, of course, if it is of a more personal nature, what we're asking people to share, pausing the recording and making that a very visible thing is a wise thing. So let's talk about the middle a little bit more, and the practice time. So Xiomara talks about storytelling using real life experience is important, stimulates imagination and empathy. Absolutely. So giving participants opportunities to share their story, to share their experiences. And as we were talking before our session started, giving people a chance to talk about failures really is a great way to connect, because the brain is also masterful at retaining what didn't work last time. And there's a huge relationship between what didn't work last time and one's perceived self-concept of ability to perform effectively. The brain has a self-preservation mode too. Failures are there. Things that didn't work last time are stored in the brain to protect your personal safety, right? And even if that personal safety is related to I took a risk and I shared an idea and people laughed at me. Or someone made a comment that my idea wasn't pertinent to what we were talking about. Even those kinds of risky things, what we consider to be failures, can have an impact on the brain's ability to store information, because that self-concept piece is really important. Absolutely, storytelling and empathy are critical here as well. Love this concept that you shared, Xiomara, because it allows me to also talk about this. Human emotion is also important to retention. Okay, so when you feel as a learner a personal emotional connection in any way, sadness, happiness, joy, appreciation, empathy, as Xiomara has shared, all of those emotions activate another portion of our brain, which helps us avoid forgetting that experience. Which is why my daughter, who is a music major and is enrolled in a music history class, she's not a history buff, and she feels no emotional connection to the music of the 1400s, taught by a professor that plays music that is painful to her ears, and taught in a way that is incredibly dry. She has no emotional connection to that. Her only emotional connection is negative, and that makes her incredibly challenged to retain music history information, even though the kid is the most musical learner I've ever met. Okay, so quick example there. All right, a couple of other ideas here to share. Thank you all so much for your engagement. A couple of ideas to share. I think this kind of goes from, you can draw these implications, but I really want to emphasize this point. During downtime, what Sousa would call practice or rehearsal, we've talked about emotions and connections to prior experience. We've talked about meaningful practice, right? That is very different, because it is what Sousa would call elaborative rehearsal. Elaborative rehearsal is where our brains make meaningful connections to us personally. That is very different from rote rehearsal. Sousa also talks about rote rehearsal, right? Rote rehearsal can be valuable if we need to retain, basic knowledge level information like multiplication tables. There are certain dates. There are definitely things that we retain best through rote rehearsal. But as you think about the types of ideas that you want to share as an extension educator, most of them are not factual things that you want people to memorize. They are behaviors and approaches and strategies that require personal application and therefore require personal connection. So personal connection is best going to be made through elaborative rehearsal, not rote rehearsal. So as you're thinking about how can I use my downtime, how can I create a learning opportunity, it is not about memorizing what was shared in the prime time. It is about elaborating on and drawing meaning. Who's got a thought, reaction, or connection to this that you'd like to share? See you, Whitney. Thank you. So The last piece of the learning process is prime time 2. Prime time 2, to me, is where really the rubber hits the road. There are opportunities to share new ideas. Usually those new ideas are going to be in a shorter period of time. But those new ideas are really critical for application is my advice. What are the opportunities you are going to give your learners to make connections to the application for future use of this new information? So prime time 2, remember, does not have to come down to the presenter introducing new information. Another very effective strategy is to use prime time 2 for a meaningful opportunity for learners to apply before the session ends, okay? And so for that purpose, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to think about the next presentation or learning experience you need to create. And I want you to think about how will you structure your presentation specific to that content? How will you structure that presentation to maximize the primacy recency effect? So I'm going to give you 3 minutes of reflection here to think about your application, and then we'll come back and review. Feel free to turn off video if you need to do that, but please don't leave. There's more at the end. Okay, so I know that on Zoom, providing 3 minutes of camera off for think time is a wonderful information or wonderful opportunity to go check your email. But I hope you actually did process a little bit and thought about some application opportunities. And thank you for, I need help with pronouncing Miss Martin's name correctly. Can you help me? I don't want to continue to say it incorrect. Is it Xiomara? Cece, okay, thank you, Cece. I really appreciate your contribution there. Great opportunity for a Socratic method, absolutely, because hearing from other people is another way to form connections. I chose application today because I know very often we don't get enough opportunities to just think and apply. So who would be willing to share your reflections of your specific application and the context in which you will apply it? Any volunteers?
I'm doing a freezing and drying session tomorrow with high school students. And so I decided I would talk about safety first, maintain like hand washing, safe handling of the food prior to freezing or drying it. Then do the activity in the middle, a hand washing activity, as well as the tasting of foods that I have dried for them. And then end, again with, maintaining safety. And then why would we do that? What are the benefits of, freezing or drying food as far as decreasing waste and, increasing the lifespan of the food and that kind of thing. So instead of saving the tasting for the end, like I did the last time I did this, I thought I'll do that in the middle and then, end with the benefits of doing that. So.
Great example, Misty. Thank you so much for being brave and sharing that too. And that tasting in the middle is a critical thing because, wow, what a great way to help students make connections to that content. Safety up front makes a lot of sense. Most important thing they need to remember and apply. But then opportunities, you also talked about opportunities for them to explore why in the middle. Why would we freeze or dehydrate? Yeah, wonderful example. So during our time together today, thank you, Misty, again for that. during our time together today, we've had an opportunity to take a look at and really just be reminded, right? Because I didn't share anything new. I probably just, maybe I shared some things in a different way than you thought about before regarding how the brain processes information and stores it for later retrieval. But the key idea that I wanted you to walk away with today is how do we really emphasize and maximize the opportunities for learning, taking advantage of the primacy recency effect. This notion that the very first segment of your learning environment is going to be what your learners will retain the best. And the last pieces of information that they share will be what they remember second. But the activities in the middle are where you really can make a difference with effectiveness if you give opportunities to your learners for application, meaningful storage, emotional connection, and purposeful practice. So hopefully those ideas are ones that you can now continue to practice with and apply as you think about your next learning environment or engagement opportunity that you need to work with your stakeholders. If any of this information was interesting to you, I really encourage you to take and I get no royalties off of this. I just think this is a tremendously useful text that really offers some wonderfully practical examples to how related to how to maximize learning. So I thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you. If you ever have questions or need ideas or want to brainstorm together with someone, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm at washburn.130@osu.edu. Would love to hear from you. Thanks so much for joining us in our ACEL 2 extension session today, and have a wonderful, warm weekend.
Yes, thank you all so much. Thank you, Dr. Washburn. We appreciate your time and energy put into the session this morning. And thank you to you all for being an active and engaged audience. I did add a link for an evaluation. If you can take just a few minutes, it also gives opportunities for future topics, which we do take into consideration as we plan the next series. So please take time for that. But thank you all so much. We do have another upcoming session on March 24th, and it will be, I lost my topic, hold on. So we do have on March 24th, learner engagement. So it'll be kind of another add-on to things that we learned today. That'll be Karen Filson leading that session. So thank you all, and please check our webpage to register for the next session. Thanks, everyone.